Tonight, make or break in New Hampshire.
70% of Americans don't want to see a Donald Trump-Joe Biden rematch.
She cannot do this job.
It's the last weekend of campaigning in the nation's first presidential primary. Can any Republican dent Donald Trump's lead?
I'm Caitlin Huey-Burns in New Hampshire, where Nikki Haley is betting it all.
Also tonight, bone-chilling cold. Winter's icy grip tightens for tens of millions, and new storms impact the West. What to expect ahead. Plus, widening conflict. New missile strikes boosting tensions between Israel and Iran.
I'm Charlie Daggett at sea with the U.S. Navy and Marines stepping up their readiness in this region.
Bull run? Dow and S&P reach new heights. Will more Americans feel it?
I'm Naomi Ruckham on Wall Street. The American economy is looking up, but some dark clouds loom large over the housing market.
And later, an unbearable ordeal. A grizzled survivor of the war in Ukraine finds a safe new home.
In the middle of a war zone, and he's experienced some really horrible things.
This is the CBS Weekend News from Washington with Adriana Diaz.
Good evening. Adriana is off. I'm Nancy Cordes. Tonight, millions of Americans from Montana to New Hampshire are enduring some of the coldest temperatures so far this winter. For many, a thaw is in sight. The latest on the extreme weather in just a moment. But we begin tonight with the countdown to Tuesday's first in the nation primary. Former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley fending off attacks from her two main rivals as they work to drive her from the race. Today, she questioned the mental fitness of frontrunner Donald Trump. CBS's Caitlin Huey-Burns is with the Haley campaign tonight in Nashua, New Hampshire. Caitlin?
Good evening, Nancy. Well, the temperature outside has dropped, but inside the heat is on between Nikki Haley and Donald Trump as the former president looks to New Hampshire to solidify his path to the nomination.
4 days from now, we're going to win another historic victory in the great state of New Hampshire.
Competing for New Hampshire, Donald Trump and Nikki Haley are questioning each other's fitness for office.
I know her very well. She's not tough enough. She's not smart enough. And she wasn't respected enough. She cannot do this job.
At a rally here, Trump confused Haley for Nancy Pelosi, blaming her for security failures on January 6th.
Nikki Haley is in charge of security.
I wasn't even in D.C. on January 6th. I wasn't in office then. They're saying he got confused. We can't have someone else that we question whether they're mentally fit to do this. We can't.
But Trump maintains a commanding lead in the polls here, and he's rolling out key endorsements from Haley's home state.
We need Donald Trump.
With Tim Scott, whom Haley had appointed to the U.S. Senate, Trump has the support of over half the Republicans in Congress. That includes New York Congresswoman Elise Stefanik.
Does that mean that Donald Trump is the establishment candidate of the Republican Party?
No, it means that we are unifying behind him. Donald Trump is the leader of the Republican Party. He has been since he ran in 2016. That's where the voters are. The voters determine the leader of the party, and they overwhelmingly support President Trump.
At Trump's headquarters in Manchester, volunteers like Thad Riley are working the phones.
I'm here all the time, and I would say that I probably make a couple hundred every day when I can. I squeeze in, yeah.
A couple hundred calls every day.
Yeah.
And Caitlin joins me once again from Nashua. Caitlin, what about Florida Governor Ron DeSantis? What's his strategy this weekend?
Yeah, Nancy, Ron DeSantis was actually campaigning in South Carolina today. That's the site of the next primary. He's all but ceded New Hampshire to Nikki Haley and Donald Trump. And speaking of South Carolina, Nancy, in another slight to Nikki Haley, Donald Trump is campaigning here in New Hampshire tonight and bringing with him top officials from South Carolina to campaign. Nancy?
Very interesting. Caitlin Huey-Burns covering all of it. Thank you. Tonight, frigid cold weather is again sweeping the country from the plains to the East Coast. In some places, the mercury is nearly 40 degrees below average. But in Buffalo, they're ready for football. Fans were paid to dig out the stadium as the Bills prepare to host the Chiefs tomorrow here on CBS. Relief from the cold is in sight, luckily. Let's check in with Molly McCollum from our partners at the Weather Channel.
Good evening, Nancy. There is a big warm up on the way for the lower 48. For example, Omaha will make it above freezing on Tuesday for the first time in nearly 2 weeks. Before we get to the warmer weather, Arctic air will combine with moisture from the Gulf to create an icy mess from Oklahoma to Illinois. Travel will be treacherous on Monday morning in OKC, Tulsa, and St. Louis, and power outages are likely. Meanwhile, light snow moves into Chicago and areas around the Great Lakes. And as temperatures warm, rain takes over, and it will start to add up as several disturbances move through the south. Flooding will be top of mind along the Gulf Coast and the southeast. And Sunday in Orchard Park will feature a very cold playoff game. But Nancy, kickoff temperatures in the low 20s that will feel balmy compared to the 4 below zero at kickoff in Kansas City last weekend.
Maybe no freezing mustaches this weekend. Molly McCollum of the Weather Channel, thank you so much. Now to the widening crisis in the Middle East. Today, at least 2 U.S. troops in Iraq were injured when their air base came under heavy rocket and missile fire from what U.S. officials say are Iran-backed militias. An attack in Syria today is raising tensions between Iran and Israel after 5 Revolutionary Guards were killed in an airstrike in Damascus. And in Yemen, U.S. forces took aim once again at militants who have been targeting international shipping. CBS's Charlie D'Agata is in the region with the U.S. Navy.
Before dawn and below deck this morning, we got ready to disembark from the USS Bataan. As water flooded the well deck, the vessel's lower deck, and our landing craft was untethered, we pushed out into the eastern Mediterranean Sea, hitching an unexpected ride back to shore, but gaining an insight into why this amphibious assault ship has been deployed here. This landing craft is what gives the USS Bataan its unique ship-to-shore ability to go anywhere, do anything at any time. The 26th Marine Expeditionary Unit out of North Carolina is specially trained and equipped to get themselves in or get people out of a war zone. For example, getting Americans out of Israel or Lebanon, or to deter the militant group Hezbollah from launching an all-out war in northern Israel. Then there's the other regional threat, Houthi rebels launching attacks against commercial vessels, even U.S. warships, in the Red Sea. And that is where the nearby guided missile destroyer, the USS Arleigh Burke, comes in.
If these are enemy missiles heading inbound to protecting the Bataan.
In the Combat Information Center, the crew showed us a simulated attack from 3 inbound missiles.
Stand by for missile intercept 1236.
And how this heavily armed ship would take them down. This is exactly the kind of U.S. warship that has been intercepting Houthi missiles in the Red Sea. And the commanding officer here has told his sailors to be ready to join this fight at any time.
The things in the Red Sea just are reminders to us of the things that are possible and capable of happening.
And it feels real now.
Absolutely, it feels real. To the sailors and crew here, they have friends on the ships that are down there, people they know, people they communicate with.
The deployment of the Bataan and the Marines on board has been extended. It's not clear for how long. As the Marine commander put it to us, providing a certain force in an uncertain world. Charlie D'Agata, CBS News, aboard the USS Bataan on the eastern Mediterranean Sea.
Now to the economy. Investors celebrated this week as 2 of 3 major stock indexes hit new all-time highs. But are more Americans feeling those gains? CBS's Naomi Ruckham is on Wall Street for us tonight. Naomi?
Big picture here on Wall Street, it's been a solid stretch for the American economy. But for those hoping to buy a home, pay rent, or afford groceries, it's not all quite as rosy. Wall Street closed out the week on a record upswing Friday. And on Main Street, many consumers are feeling pretty good, too.
I think the economy is doing well. For me personally, yeah, it's going well.
According to the University of Michigan, consumer sentiment, which measures economic optimism, surged 29% since November, the biggest 2-month gain since 1991. Mark Zandi of Moody's Analytics says Americans' perceptions are finally catching up with reality.
They're seeing the low unemployment, lots of jobs. Wage growth is strong. It's stronger than the rate of inflation, so their real incomes, purchasing power is improving.
Another perk, Prices at the pump nationwide are averaging about $3 a gallon for regular unleaded, but a cloud still hangs over the housing market.
Especially for first-time home buyers. I think it's tough for them right now.
The National Association of Realtors says sales of existing homes dropped to a 30-year low in 2023 after mortgage rates climbed to their highest rate in more than 2 decades.
You've got a lot of folks that are kind of locked into their home. They got mortgages at very low interest rates, so it just doesn't make any economic sense to move.
But this week also saw thousands of layoffs at Macy's, Wayfair, and even Sports Illustrated.
If you look at layoffs across the economy, they're extraordinarily low.
Experts say it could take some time and a significant boost to the average income before we see real improvement in the housing market. By some estimates, up to 3 years. Nancy?
Wow. Naomi Ruckham in New York tonight. Thank you. For the third time in 4 months, Congress has averted a painful shutdown of the federal government. But it's a brief respite. Again, the new deadline is just 6 weeks away. And as CBS's Scott MacFarlane reports, there is a price to pay.
His family appliance store has been open 40 years in Woodbridge, Virginia. Marty Noe knows what it looks like when business slows down, which it has 3 times since September.
Had all these near government shutdowns, do you see business dry up when that happens?
Every time there's even just talk of a government shutdown, even if it actually doesn't shut down, we immediately see an impact. The minute that a member of Congress says that they'd rather shut down the government than approve a budget, the next day we see a nosedive in how much business we do.
Yet again, spending money we don't have.
Congress's 6 months of brinksmanship and inability to pass a long-term deal to fund the government has rattled some of the millions of federal workers and contractors and military families who rely on a stable paycheck, including military spouse Tanya Murphy, who told us in November she'd cut back on spending.
We get pay eventually, but in the meantime, there's still bills coming in.
A Congressional Research Service report in September warned federal workers may decrease their spending as a result of not receiving a paycheck on time. And there's fears even a brief shutdown could jolt the stock market and jolt the economy.
Every single one of them actually cost taxpayers more money. It reduced our GDP growth. It increased unemployment.
But the warnings haven't changed Congress's growing habit of close calls.
This is what a democracy and a Congress looks like when there are many people with different backgrounds. Our constituents want us fighting for them.
The next deadline to avoid a government shutdown is just 6 weeks away, with the prospect of another standoff in a still divided Congress, now in the heart of an election year. Scott MacFarlane, CBS News, the Capitol.
We learned today of the death of jazz and R&B singer Marlena Shaw. Shaw was best known for her rendition of California Soul. The song remains popular to this day with over 100 million streams on Spotify. Shaw's daughter says she died at home while listening to her favorite songs. Marlena Shaw was 81 years old. Straight ahead on the CBS Weekend News, 43 years after the Iran hostage crisis ended, why the pain endures for surviving hostages and their families.
And that's the way it is. Tuesday, January 20th, 1981, a day that began as the 444th day of captivity and ended as the first day of freedom for the American hostages in Iran. This is Walter Cronkite.
That was CBS's Walter Cronkite 43 years ago today. It was on this day in 1981 that 52 Americans held hostage by Iranian revolutionaries were released, ending a nightmare for them, their families, and the nation. But as Barry Peterson reports, that was not the end of the story or of their suffering.
The homecoming came after a brief stop in Germany for family reunions. Among the hostages, Richard Moorfield, the consul general at the embassy, with his wife Dottie and son Stephen. But when the celebrations ended, a new battle began with their own government to get compensation for what they endured. Today, not getting the compensation, not getting the attention, how do you feel about your own government?
I feel they betrayed us. I feel they have neglected us. I feel they have mistreated us.
Congress did pass a law providing $4.4 million to each hostage or their heirs and $600,000 to families. The money from fines and seizures against companies illegally doing business with Iran. But less than a quarter of the money has been paid because 9/11 families were later added in and the fund was depleted, even though Iran was not implicated in the 9/11 attack. Attorney Tom Langford represents the hostages.
Many of them are housed right across from the torture room where Iranians, military, and others were being put to death through water hoses stuck down their throat or choked or various means. And they could hear that all. And they were told, tomorrow's your day. So every time the jail cell opened, they thought this is the last sound I'm ever to hear.
With traumatic effects that lasted the rest of their lives.
It changed his life. It shortened his life. He suffered. He couldn't be in a room with the door closed. I've been in hotel rooms where I found him asleep on the floor. He's got towels laid out so he could crack the door. All of these things, I mean, we laugh, it can be funny, but it wasn't funny for him. It was panic.
Dick went back to work at the State Department and died in 2010 at age 81. But Dottie, now in an assisted living facility, is still fighting.
We were married. I mean, I've had a good life. Stephen has a good life. But that money represents justice. It doesn't represent trips or buying things or any of that. It represents justice.
And still waiting for the day that justice will be done. Barry Peterson, CBS News, Durham, North Carolina.
What an ordeal. Still ahead on the CBS Weekend News, a new multinational arrival to the International Space Station.
A big, warm welcome to Axiom 3 from us on board the space station.
That was the greeting for the crew of the SpaceX Dragon capsule moments after they docked at the International Space Station. The crew included a retired American astronaut, an Italian co-pilot, a Swedish flyer, and the first Turkish citizen ever to fly in space. A record 8 nations are now represented on the ISS, including Spain, Russia, Japan, and Denmark. Next on the CBS Weekend News, a bear of a tale from war-torn Ukraine with an unlikely ending. We end tonight with a rescue from the front lines of the war in Ukraine. An unlikely victim found in a bombed-out zoo where many of his animal companions had perished. CBS's Ian Lee has the story.
A victim of Russia's war in Ukraine is finding a new home in Scotland. Yampel, the Asiatic bear, survived an unbearable ordeal.
He has been through a lot. He's been in the middle of a war zone and he's experienced some really horrible things.
Ukrainian troops seized a bombed-out zoo in the midst of fighting in 2022, rescuing Yampel in the nick of time. Nearly all the other 200 animals died from starvation, others killed by bullets or shrapnel.
We weren't entirely sure if he'd be kind of experiencing something similar to like PTSD.
Yampel was skin and bones when he was taken to Belgium to recuperate and given more than the bare necessities with some sweet treats.
Bears love it. If there's one thing that bears love, then it's definitely things with sugar.
Yampel is now a healthy 440 pounds and getting his bearings in his new Scottish surroundings.
He seems to actually be quite sleepy right now, so he's been spending a lot of time indoors.
With no signs yet of PTSD, zookeepers are hopeful the 12-year-old will only have peaceful years ahead. Ian Lee, CBS News, London.
A true survivor. That's the news for this Saturday. First thing tomorrow, CBS Sunday Morning, followed by Face the Nation. Margaret Brennan's guests include Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, Republican presidential candidate Nikki Haley, and Arkansas Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders. I'm Nancy Cordes in Washington. Good night.